Yep.
All right, good.
This is basically opening the tent and setting it up. The system I use is because it's on my roof long ways and I do not want the poles to hit my car. So I'm going to show you. I'm opening the tent.
You don't have to worry about
First unzip the tent, of course, open it. I go to one side and the poles are to where the extensions are pretty close to the edge, where I can make sure I've connected my pole into the center pole. Then I put it in the hoop. I start with the smaller poles first because there's less tension on them, and they also help for whenever I do the longer poles by lifting some of the tent material for me. So as you can see I also kind of tilt it to the direction it needs to be. And also when you break the tent down, you want to kind of fold things into place so that when you set it up, it will be easy to do like this. Once I do this side, I'm going to move over to the other side where the poles are folded up inside the tent instead of on top of the tent material. That keeps them from banging the side of my car as I'm assembling this side of the tent.
All right, let's go up and mostly focus in
now
here.
On this side, I start with the larger poles first. This pole happens to be tighter than the other pole, so I usually do it first to get it done. I'm connecting it into the cross pole, push it up. Now you also put it inside the outer window. That way you can zip the outer window up and down without the pole being in the way. Now I'm setting up the second long pole, and the reason I do it this way is the shorter poles, as you're soon going to see, are folded up into the tent material between the two layers. So this just makes it easier to get the pole in and out, and it's also the reverse procedure to take the tent down. Now my two taller poles are inserted and holding up most of the material. Here I'm pulling out the shorter pole, connecting it, pushing it back up in to where the arch is where it needs to be, which is tilted toward the end of the tent.
See, I tuck them so they don't hit the car like they used to.
Yep.
Now this pole's inserted, which pretty much is the outer setup. So now we're going to move to the archway supports. I leave those inside of the tent. I grab one of them and I put it above the door to where it's just easier to get in and out of the tent for the other one. It goes through the little compartment up above. At first I used to not run them through the tube, and then I found that they would move if you didn't. So I put them through the tube. It just takes a few extra seconds. The ends where they connect, if you push in like I just did and you push the material back, it's easier to get it into the rings on each end. Those inner walls tend to collapse in as you collapse the tent, so if you shove it back away from you, that end of the pole will then secure easily. Now I go up into the tent so that I can get across to the other side to put the other pole in while I'm laying on my back. It's just easier to see. Also, the other window is about halfway unzipped. You might have to unzip it a little bit more just so that you can see where the rings are up in the material. But once I get that support pole in, I usually zip the windows up about halfway to have privacy when I get in the tent. Now that it's assembled, I'm fixing to disassemble it. So the disassemble is the reverse, but if you pay attention and disassemble it the way I do, it makes it easier for the next setup. Here's the disassemble. First, take that pole out while you're in the tent before you even get out. It's just easier to do. That window being collapsed does not matter much. Then you take out the support on the side of the tent that you usually access.
You know,
I call this the ladder side. This is the side I always put the ladder on.
It don't take long. Okay, now let me make sure I get this right. Okay, we're going to do this pole.
Now you're going to start with the small poles first. That way you can fold them up inside the material while the larger poles help hold the material up out of your way. Get them tucked up inside nice and neat. They don't hurt anything up in there. They've always been fine.
Out of the two
and they
big ones.
do not hit my car when I'm assembling it later. Then the harder pole to get out, I do it first so that the other poles help holding the material up.
I'm home free.
You'll pull it out a little bit to where the bungee comes out, and then you can fold it inside through the door, and I place it to the left far, not too far, but just to make sure it's out of the center area, because anything in the middle, the tent will not want to fold shut easily. So you make sure everything is in a certain place. Once those two poles are in, now you go to the other side. I start with the big poles first, and see how I tilted the top toward the middle. As I took the pole out, I twisted it to the left. Throw the pole on top. Same thing with this pole. Twist it so that the center piece falls towards the middle of the tent. Throw the pole up on top. And doing the small poles last helps hold some of the material up to make it easier to get the bigger poles out. Once the smaller poles are out, placed on top, make sure they're pointing across the tent. Go around to the other side. This is a view from the top. You're going to want to move the material as much as you can to the center of the tent. You want to make sure the poles are on the ends they need to be on. Sometimes I put the poles underneath the folds of material to where it holds the material can hold the poles down. And that way when you flip the tent over in half, the poles do not come dangling down and stab into the other side and make a big divot in the tent. So I'm making sure both center dividers are folded over toward the middle of the tent on each end. This is going to make the tent close smaller also. So continue to gather your material, fold your tent up. It'll just make it a lot easier to close. After everything's in place, you can flip it over. The poles usually don't fall in the wrong spot, they stay. And then you just start to tuck the material in. Always make sure you tuck the material good so that the zippers do not rip the material or cut into it. I've had the zipper snag a couple of times, but it didn't even hurt anything. The tent is pretty durable. I work a little bit down each side, which is just going to make it easier to zip along the back side also. Also, I'm making sure the poles and everything are up in there nice and neat. As you do this a few times, you'll get better at it, and it'll be easier to do. The whole process, going slow, maybe takes about 5 minutes to open and 5 minutes to close. It's not very difficult. Also, doing it up here on the roof is kind of easier for me because I can see everything as I'm putting it together. If you do have it on the ground, you can put some weight on it, which will help it zip, but it actually zips no problem, as you can see. Just tuck the material and it'll zip up in there nice and neat. I do keep a cover sheet and a blanket in the tent. I try to keep the pillows in a couple of times, and you can, but it just kind of bows the tent up pretty good, and if you can't sit on it to help close it, it makes it harder to close, plus it makes it a little heavier. I'd say the tent weighs about 25 to 30 pounds with just the blanket and the sheet in it. As I zip it closed, usually I leave the zippers about 6 inches apart so they can get some air in the tent also. I put the ladder down. I'm going to put it into the trunk of the car. I put that and my pillows in the trunk first so they give the tent a base, and the tent sits more level inside my car.
Yep.
Then you can see taking the tent down off of the roof is not hard to do even by yourself. And I angle it a little bit to fit inside of my trunk hatch. Push it in, and then you're done. It is basically that easy.
You can hit pause or stop.